Shall I give you the benefit of my wisdom? Shall I? Shall I attempt to intellectualise and to justify why we, the British, should not be ashamed of our existence, our heritage, and our collective impact on the world? Shall I marshal all I can from my limited and non-academic understanding of what I think I know about who we essentially are? Would that be useful? Would it be constructive? Would it rally those of us who feel the need to be thought of as good, moral, or, as that increasingly overused maxim puts it, on the right side of history? Would that help us? Will it cause those poor ignorant fools who believe that the existence of the United Kingdom and the British Empire before it was an unprecedented and a uniquely evil plague on the world to see the error of their ways and come over to our side? Will they thank us for leading them back to the path of truth and away from the radical ahistorical nonsense they have been taught? Will it cause them to reassess their relationship with the place they call home and their personal interactions with their neighbours and compatriots? Will they discover a new-found respect for the place that has fed and clothed them, either since birth, or at least since they pitched up on the beach at Dungeness? And will they, after reassessing all this, become more relaxed about being here, appreciate it, make it better, and maybe even become happy about it? Will they? Will they fuck? We know that they will do no such thing, and yet we continue to think that if we defend the honour of our society, we can stop the attacks on it. We can't. Because they're not concerned about what's true, they're concerned only with what they can get away with. They're concerned only with what they can get out of us. They're only concerned with what they can guilt trip us into giving up and giving it to them. They are concerned only with winning. They know that they cannot beat us conventionally, so they try to beat us unconventionally. They use our goodness and our virtues against us. They know that our impulse is to play fair, and so they use that against us. When necessary, they present themselves as cringing minorities to elicit our sympathy, and when they have it, they press home their advantage and believing, unlike us, that compassion is the same as weakness, change their pleading to demands, and then very rapidly to threats. But in a way they're right. In certain circumstances, compassion is no different from weakness. When strength is what is required, compassion really is weakness. And when it comes to subliterate medieval barbarians who show zero compassion, for instance, when an adulteress is stoned to death in a football stadium, compassion to them is a totally alien concept. It's not surprising that they can't tell the difference. So we need to stop defending our honour and just start defending ourselves, because nobody else is going to do it. The police aren't going to do it. The courts aren't going to do it. The media isn't going to do it. The institutions aren't going to do it. The politicians are very definitely not going to do it. So the arguments are now irrelevant. It matters to us that we know we are good people. But it doesn't matter to them. And what's more, it doesn't matter to them that they are good people. The most honest of them even tell us that it doesn't matter. They tell us that they will win. They tell us that Britain will be conquered. And they don't tell us that they will beat us in a fair fight, because they know they can't do that. They tell us only that they will outbreed us, then outnumber us, and by force of numbers turn our democracy against us and then take over. And by then, there will be no concessions made to any minorities, cringing or otherwise. So this isn't Queensberry rules. This isn't cricket. This is about survival. We need to learn to fight dirty, but we also need to learn to box clever. Now is not the time for complacency or arrogance, nor for living on past glories. But we can nevertheless take the necessary inspiration from the past. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, one of the key reasons why the RAF prevailed over the Luftwaffe was that the British were underestimated. The Germans had conquered all before them, and quite easily too. They thought it would be a pushover. But the British, with the help of radar and two formidable defensive weapons, the Hurricane and the Spitfire, husbanded their resources so that no effort was wasted and the home advantage could be exploited. It has been said that during the battle, the Germans abandoned their much vaunted ruthless efficiency and sought glory rather than victory. The British, by contrast, were a model of efficiency. The Germans appeared to fight flamboyantly, as if they were the British from an earlier imperial age, and the British behaved more like stereotypical Germans. So how does this translate to today? Having been born and raised in a society that relies on the fairness of law, we tend to, still, rely on that law to protect us. But that law is gone. The rule of law is no more. The disconnect between the policing of the Black Lives Matter protests and the anti-lockdown protests proved that, as does the softly police approach to people blocking roads compared to the instant and brutal crackdown on those who attempt to unblock those roads. If that wasn't sufficient evidence that the rule of law is now no more than kowtowing to the pro-Palestinian mob by the police should be enough evidence by now. A stark illustration of this was the case of a pro-Palestinian protester arrested recently and then promptly de-arrested when the pressure from the mob got too great. Without fear or favour? It's a struggle to know whether the police are just cowardly or instead just following a policy that's been handed down to them. But we can learn from our enemies. In fact, we must, if we are to survive. We must do what they do. We must overwhelm the police when they come for us. We have to abandon any faith completely in the idea that the law will protect us. We need to realise that us having our day in court, whereby with force of argument, perhaps delivered with an urgent and passionate intensity, we might awake the decency and the sense of justice in our judges is a dangerous fantasy. The courts, along with all of our other institutions, are our enemies at least as much as the young men arriving daily on the beach. Perhaps even more so. They are certainly more guilty. Many, perhaps most of those young men are simply seeking a better life, and although they do owe us, as the taxpayers that support them, those at the top of the institutions, like judges, owe us a great deal more allegiance. The fact that we do not get it is nothing short of treachery. The sad fact is that, as previously and probably lifelong law-abiding citizens, we must avoid getting in the crosshairs of the legal system as much as possible. Remember the bloke who was jailed for leaving a bacon sandwich outside a mosque? He didn't receive a life sentence, but that's exactly what he got. He died in prison, as intended. Another example is Richard Vobe's recent woes, faced with an intimidating and bullying bailiff demanding money from him when he was seriously unwell. He called the police, who astonishingly actually turned up and in 3 police cars, only for them to side with the bailiff. We must understand this and act accordingly. The police are our enemy. They are our primary enemy, more than any other, since they are the first enforcers. And they, quite obviously, are not enforcing the law. They are enforcing an agenda that we are not privy to, and one that is plainly not to our benefit. Some while back, I released a video entitled, "I Need 1,000 Men." It was in response to the Brexit debacle and my frustration that the demonstrable democratic will of the Brexit vote was being denied us by our overlords. How unimportant that seems now. But what was the response? Apathy mostly, and some ridicule thrown in for good measure. In the end, I received, I think, 31 offers of help, so only 969 short. But my reach, although somewhat longer then, was still pretty limited. The theoretical peak of my subscribers has been 15,000, but is in reality no more than 1,000, and probably only really 500 or so. It's not surprising that it didn't get further traction. The same can be said for my recent petition on firearms, less than 250 when it needed 100,000. But we need to organise. We need to band together. We're not armed, so the only thing we have is numbers. I know that there is support out there, and it's in the millions, if only it can be tapped. I'm obviously not the person to aspire those millions, and even if I was, I don't have the resources and the wherewithal to build anything. I can scarcely keep my own head above water. I'm one of those people for whom a £1,000 bill could sink me. And apart from anything else, any leader can be taken out at any time. Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, Lawrence Fox, Russell Brand, Neil Oliver, even Donald Trump is expendable. This cannot rely on leaders. Leaders are unreliable. Not because they are lacking in themselves, some are genuinely solid guys, but because nobody individually can withstand the power of the state if it decides to take them out. The only leaders we should follow are ones that can be replaced tomorrow with identical ones. And this is a practical approach too, because it will allow anyone who puts their head above the parapet to withdraw without dishonour when the heat gets too much. This would also act as an incentive, or at least not act as a disincentive, to encourage people to take the risk. And when any leader we might be currently following does so, we will know that it is because they have been got at. When one's kids are threatened, it's usually game over. But then the torch can be passed to another. It's the policy, the movement, the momentum that has to survive, not the figurehead. There can be no cult of personality, because personalities can sink the ship. Witness our current king. Many people, including me, still support the idea of the monarchy. But when it is headed by King Charles III, that support evaporates. So what I'm proposing is a list, like a directory of perhaps 1,000 men locally, or even just 500, that can be contacted and instantly come to each other's aid. If somebody is being threatened with eviction or having their house repossessed, or like poor Richard Vobes, some bailiff scumbag threatened to steal his van over some bullshit ULEZ fine, Richard, like the rest of us, needs to be able to call us rather than the filth, who will add to the pressure to have to submit to extortion rather than alleviate it. The police are not the police anymore, not in the way we understand the concept of a police force. We just don't have a police force anymore. We have enforcers, but not of the law. Of course, some people are just feckless and habitually do not pay their bills. There will be some people like that. But we cannot concern ourselves with these details, and the great majority of people will pay their bills if they are able to. The brutal and idiot response to COVID will have financially crippled many. Small business owners, particularly in catering and hospitality, have borne the brunt of this, while supermarkets and McDonald's have been given preferential treatment. Preferential treatment that they didn't need, but got anyway. Possession is 9/10 of the law, they say. Once that bailiff snatched Richard Vobes' keys out of his hand and put them in his pocket, he was in 90% possession of his van. The arrival of the police didn't change that. But the arrival of 100 men in his defence will change that. In fact, it will change the entire game. The establishment relies on being able to isolate people and pick them off one by one. We know that the establishment wants to deprive us of our cars, our houses, and eventually our liberty. And if we continue to respect the law, a law that they have twisted and contorted to their own advantage, they will be able to do so. But the law should, by now, be dead to us. There is no rule of law. There is only the rule of force. But there are only 130,000 police officers in the entire country. That's what they're using as muscle. How often do you see even 100 Rozzers in one place, other than on a central London demo? And we know from footage of those demos that they have drafted in police from Wales, from Cheshire and elsewhere. But the rule of force is a two-way street. We know that the police cave if there is enough resistance. Sure, they can do what they say is their tactic and hang back, record on their stupid cameras and then come for us later. What they say is a tactic, so as not to inflame tensions. But we know why they really do that. It's because later they know that they will only have to arrest one person half asleep in his underpants at 5 in the morning. They are far too cowardly to attempt an arrest in the face of a braying, Jew-hating mob. Of course, I'm well aware that any such directory will be infiltrated by treasonous coppers, but that is a risk that we're going to have to take. On the eve of the Armistice Day pro-Hamas march, many on our side were discouraging people not to attend the memorial because to do so risked falling into their trap. But what was the alternative? To allow a load of bloodthirsty Islamists to defecate on the cenotaph? That would have showed them, wouldn't it? Risk is a part of this, but doing nothing is the biggest risk. In fact, doing nothing is not even a risk. Doing nothing means that the totalitarian takeover is an absolute certainty. Now, I'm not promoting a renter mob in opposition to their mob. I'm not a man of violence, and I am, like most people, uncomfortable being around truly violent men. Men who enjoy violence are like drunks or junkies. You never know what they're going to do next. What I am proposing is a collection of strong, firm men who will not allow injustice and will not break ranks. Implacable men are what is needed. If strong, firm men are not forthcoming, then violent men will be. And anyway, on the subject of infiltration by elements of the state, we have to make it so that it doesn't matter if it is infiltrated. If somebody is being intimidated by some bullying bailiff, all we have to do is show up in overwhelming numbers and say, no, you're not taking this person's car or van, you will not evict them, and you will not take possession of their house. There is no need for any violence. The violence will have to be perpetrated by their side. But we cannot any longer be timid. There are those who will say that law has to take its course. That to subvert it is to invite anarchy. These, of course, are the types that still believe in the rule of law and that we still have it. But we know that's not the case. But is anarchy actually worse than what we currently have? When a bailiff turns up at somebody's door, threatening to take their van because of some arbitrary fine, and then steals their van keys from their hand when they fail to comply, and then when the police turn up, the police side with the bailiff, who is essentially just a thief, is that worse than anarchy? I would say that it isn't worse. I would say that, in many ways, anarchy is somewhat better than what we currently have. Anarchy is hardly the end of the world, although it is likely to be a tougher one. And we do have to toughen up. Now, there will be some moral anomalies with this approach. We will be intruding upon the issue of private property. As someone who generally agrees with the concept of private property, it is of course unfair if a landlord cannot evict a piss-taking tenant who never pays his rent. But how many of these people are there really? Not that many, I would have said. But what about the landlord who, for instance, evicts a native British family in favour of guaranteed government-backed no-risk rent for 5 years to house some newly arrived illegal immigrants? What is the bigger injustice here? The aim of such a group would be to prevent anyone from losing their property or from being evicted. As always, there will be people who game the system and we may, in some instances, actually contribute to some injustice. But on balance, we should prevent far more injustice than we create, and we should be easily able to avoid what those virtue signalling tossers did when they prevented the deportation of that gang rapist on the tarmac at Heathrow a while back. And this group, shall we call them Friends of Liberty perhaps, should be a loosely cobbled together group of friends, connected only by their phones. That should act as a rapid reaction force that can gather quickly to defend people against the arbitrary force of the state, bailiffs, or other bullying groups, or even criminal gangs, as happened recently in the Ayrshire village of Auchinleck in Scotland. We should take inspiration from that. We have to be our own police force. So I'm prepared to do my bit in establishing this, but I can't do it alone. I am no leader, but then, as I said, we must not rely on leaders anyway. If I had more resources, more money essentially, things might be different. But they aren't. My puny financial situation means that I can be wiped out by the establishment as easily as swatting a fly. But this shouldn't matter, so long as there are unlimited numbers prepared to carry the torch. Numbers are all we have. We should use them. So let me know what you think in the comments. No one is coming to save us. If we want to stay free, it's up to us. Merry Christmas.